welcome to Zilog and Moto, the channel that has all your spooks, specters, and general things to go bump in the night. Oh, wait. Damn it. It's the wrong intro line. I'll come back to that one next week. There's a more appropriate review for that. Let me start over. This is Zilog and Moto, and I'm your host, Dave, and I'm here for one reason and one reason only, to play and review lots and lots of Sega games. Nintendo? Nah. Atari? Only if it's an arcade port. TurboGrafx 16? Well, I suppose I could be talking to Splatterhouse just to cover the rest of the series. But unless it's a very special episode, what you're getting with Zilog and Moto is a weekly, schedule permitting, look at the English language library of the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega CD, and 32X, totaling in the neighborhood of 1,275 games. Each episode provides a look at the history behind the title, possibly some personal experiences with the game, and an in-depth look at the actual package, and then finally a proper review of the game complete with game footage captured from original hardware. Most of the time. Like-on games are a problem, but I'm not skipping them, they're still part of the library. Those Master System 3D games, though, are going to be a real pain in the ass. I still haven't figured out what I'm going to do there. Anyway, that's a problem for another day. If you think you're interested in that type of Sega-specific content, I heartily recommend you subscribe, because while I am dedicated to completing this crazy project, the release schedule can be a bit wonky. But there's plenty of room on the bandwagon. Moving on, this week's video is for a game where it's kind of odd that I'm just now covering it, 131 episodes in, just due to its historical importance in kicking off, no pun intended, a game series that has seen yearly sequels ever since this release. I don't know why I hadn't picked it out yet. Maybe it was a subconscious thing with it being a slightly later release. It didn't appear on the console until December of 1993 in both the United States and Europe, and then 6 months later in Japan. And that game is the original FIFA, specifically FIFA International Soccer for the Genesis from Electronic Arts. Prior to the release of FIFA, Electronic Arts and their EA Sports brand had taken on many other sports besides soccer. But of course, most of those originated on the PC before being brought over to the Genesis, such as John Madden Football, Lakers vs. Celtics in the NBA playoffs, PGA Tour Golf, and Tony La Russa Baseball. Of course, hockey was covered as well, with NHL Hockey skipping a home computer release and appearing directly on the Genesis. And with that, the big four sports in North America were covered. But soccer was still out there looming. It wasn't a huge sport with adults in the US at the time, with its success primarily in rec leagues aimed at elementary and middle school children. So it's understandable why Electronic Arts hadn't made it a priority due to the importance of the American market, even with it being a global sport. But something big was looming on the horizon in the summer of 1994, something that not even the most anti-soccer sports fan in the United States could ignore. And that was, of course, the World Cup, which would take place in the United States for the first time in 9 stadiums across the country. So soccer was officially here, there was no denying it. The question was, what was EA going to do about it? Well, we'll take a look at their response in game form in a minute, but first, a look at the package.
FIFA International Soccer, a landmark game. It literally all started with this release. Well, okay, technically it started with the weird limited edition version of this game with a gold sticker, but really, as far as I know, the only difference between that and this is said sticker. I suppose if I wanted to, I could spend time collecting those limited edition versions of those EA Sports titles. For instance, I already have the limited edition versions of Madden 94, NHL 94, and NBA Showdown 94 without even trying. So I almost wonder if the non-limited edition versions of FIFA, or any of those titles, are actually more rare. A lot of trouble just for a sticker, if you ask me. But there's definitely a few hardcore collectors out there that actually care about these details. Moving on to the condition, this copy of FIFA isn't in bad shape, and I personally would classify it as pretty good, but definitely well loved. It's got plenty of scratches to the clear outer cover, and a few dings here and there, so that you know it's been moved around a bit. Probably the biggest issue it has is on the spine at the top. It's pulled down, almost like it got stuck in between some other titles and required a bit of force to pry it out, but thankfully, with this being the first year that EA Sports had gone to the solid white backgrounds, it's not that noticeable. Along with the new cover formatting, at this point EA had settled on standard-sized clamshells, no more wide boys or thin boys, but of course they still had to be different, so there was no hang tab to remove at the top. At least you don't have to worry about anyone doing a hatchet job on any of these cases. As far as the front cover goes, this is iconic. Yeah, there's a lot of white, and you could definitely make the argument that there's a bunch of wasted space due to that. But honestly, you had that with the black and red box Sega cases as well. I do usually prefer covers where the whole space is used, but I don't know, something about the spacing and just how clean everything looks here is very appealing. And it's a small thing, but look how the EA Sports logo at the top, the picture, and then the logo at the bottom all line up in the middle in a column. It's almost like they took the older inset formatting that they would use and just blanked out everything on the borders. Okay, that's enough about the formatting. 3 other small notes. I find it interesting that they advertised it was 16 megabits right on the cover. That's usually an action game move, not a sports title. Then there's also the totally unnecessary VRC rating. It's just about as small as they could possibly make it and still include it. And, of course, it was EA Canada that worked on this game, as how could a US-based studio make a good soccer game? Flipping over to the back, and everything I said about the good formatting on the front, forget it, as it is a mess back here. However, there are some good quality screenshots with some nice flavor text for each of them, showing off different views of the pitch, and I really like the inset that it has of all the animations involved in displaying a bicycle kick. This is the polar opposite of something like King of the Monsters 2 last week, where you could tell they just couldn't be bothered to properly capture the images from the game. Opening the case up and the manual and cartridge are both in nice condition, with the manual specifically looking barely touched over the years. I've mentioned this before in doing some of these other reviews, but early Electronic Arts games had the best manuals. Maybe they were a bit over-detailed for some, but I just love how much information they included and the thorough details. You might not need all this information to play the game, but at least it's here, in stark contrast to today's games, where you're lucky to get a tutorial level, and hope someone wrote a FAQ about the game online. Okay, that's the package. Let's get to EA's first attempt at soccer and see how well they pulled off that World Cup experience. Full disclosure, I'm an American, through and through. Yeah, I know, that's your shocked face. But the reason why I'm stating that is that even though I grew up playing soccer at school and played in various rec leagues and in high school, I'm not even going to try to pretend that I know soccer as well as people across the pond, so to speak. So while I'm somewhat familiar with how some of the international leagues go, it's possible I'm going to get some details wrong as certain things come up, so just fair warning before we get further into things. Although, if there is something I don't get quite right, definitely let me know in the comments section below, as that will be valuable information to have when I get to some of the other FIFA titles, say for instance the Sega CD version of this game. As the game was released to coincide with the upcoming World Cup '94, you probably wouldn't be surprised to hear that the main focus of the game is international play. Which makes sense, as while Major League Soccer was founded as a requirement of the United States getting that World Cup, actually about the same time this game was released in December of 1993, the league wouldn't actually start play until 1996. Now, personally, I would have enjoyed the inclusion of perhaps the Premier League teams for that year, or maybe even the Champions League, to really get the best of the best, but I could see how that might be a licensing nightmare, and it would be much easier for EA to simply focus on national teams. Which they did in a big way. Not only does FIFA, which is how I'm going to refer to it for the rest of this review for simplicity's sake, include the 24 international squads that were going to appear in the upcoming World Cup, they doubled that number to 48 and included an EA All-Star team as well. So there's no lack of variety in the different squads that you can use, and they all have their standard team colors on their kits along with their flags. And I must say, I like the nice touch of the flags waving when they're shown on the screen, as opposed to just being static images. It's a small thing, but sometimes those small touches are the difference between a good game and a great game. While the game does feature those 48 international squads, it doesn't actually have any real players, with each player just getting a generic, made-up name that somewhat represents their nationality. Although eagle-eyed players that are familiar with early Electronic Arts games on the Genesis may notice that Bing Gordon makes yet another appearance as a member of the U.S. team. U.S. soccer star, NBA announcer, marketing vice president, and game designer. Is there anything Bing Gordon can't do? As far as the teams are concerned, I do have one small complaint. You know how I specifically said earlier how much I like the Electronic Arts manuals? Well, there's one thing that I would have liked to have seen included in this manual, and that's a reference to each of the team's stats. Every team is rated in 7 categories, very similar to how the teams in the early Madden and NHL games were rated, with each rating on a 9-point scale. However, the only way to know a team's rating is to choose a mode except for Exhibition, and as you scroll through the teams, their ratings will be displayed on the screen. It would have been really nice to actually have all these ratings printed out somewhere so that you could compare the teams on your own. Admittedly, it is less of an issue if you're not playing in Exhibition mode, but I feel like this is something they could have worked out pretty easily, especially since individual player ratings aren't shown. Once you've chosen a team to play as, the game gives you a few different modes to play. Exhibition is probably where everyone will start, as you can pick your opponent, game options such as time per half, type of field, weather conditions, penalties, and offsides, and then go straight into a game. If you want to get into something more meaningful than just a simple friendly, FIFA also offers tournament mode, which replicates the form of the World Cup in 1994, which consisted of only 24 teams, as opposed to the 32 teams that the tournament was expanded to in 1998. Also, even though the 1994 World Cup saw scoring for the group change to awarding 3 points for a win instead of just 2, this didn't make it into tournament mode. But other than those 2 caveats, tournament mode functions more or less as you would expect, with the computer randomly selecting the rest of the field and placing everyone into groups, and then assuming you play well enough in your 3 group stage games, you'll make it onto the knockout portion of the tournament. If you don't want to participate in the group stage, FIFA also offers a cut-down version of tournament mode called Playoffs that's just the knockout stage. I suppose saving you a few matches. I'm not sure why someone would use this mode instead of tournament mode, but it's there. Finally, even though there's no representation of the Champions League or Premier League or any other league for that matter, there is an option to create your own league, where you pick 8 of the national teams to compete against, with standard league scoring. From a structural standpoint, I'm not sure that there's any other game mode I could ask for, except for maybe a shootout mode to practice your penalty kicks, but that's a minor nitpick. The more advanced game modes provide one of my few actual complaints about the game, as opposed to just minor annoyances. While the game was very forthcoming about advertising its 16 megabit storage capacity on the front cover, you may have noticed one other feature that was pretty common by late 1993 that's missing: battery backup. Yep, for tournaments, playoffs, and league mode, if you want to continue your progress, it's back to writing down passwords. The passwords are relatively simple, but come on, battery backup wasn't exactly some exotic feature for a game to have at this point. In reading about the history of the game, it appears that perhaps EA wasn't sure how big a seller it was going to be, and with it being the first game of the series, so I'm guessing they were trying to keep costs down. Oh well, at least this isn't something I'll have to worry about when I get around to that Sega CD version. One of the things that I really enjoy about the game is the amount of customization options that are given. For instance, all the options available for setting the length of the game. The default is 4 minutes per half, which means you can get a match in about 10 minutes, as the clock is real-time and not sped up. And that's fine if you just want some quick action, but I ended up settling on 10 minutes per half, as that felt like a good balance. Of course, you can go all the way up to full 45-minute halves for the hardcore, but that just seems excessive, and you'd probably end up with some crazy score that resembles American football instead. Along with something basic like time, there's also the option to have penalties off, on without cards, and fully on, including bookings, and then whether offsides is called via a separate option. This all comes down to personal preference, but I enjoyed having full penalties but no offsides. In the real game, I can see the argument on both sides for offsides, but in FIFA, due to the game's unique isometric presentation, there are lots of times when you might advance the ball and have no idea if one of your forwards is in an offsides position, leading to some frustrating calls. So it was nice to be able to turn it off. But even though I usually play with offsides turned off, When it is on, I liked very much how when you choose to have your team play with an attacking style, you are much more likely to catch the computer offsides due to your players pushing up the field. This was something the teams I played on growing up did a lot, and it took me right back to my playing days. From a gameplay perspective, FIFA keeps things simple, and as a result the game is fantastic to play, with anyone being able to pick up and learn the game quickly, or be like me and play the game for the first time in almost 30 years and be able to almost immediately jump back in without much practice. Along with the simplistic controls, FIFA allows you to choose whether you want to control your goalie on defense. Spoiler, you should probably let the computer handle that. And if you're playing in arcade or simulation mode, which affects whether your players tire or not, very similar to the Lakers vs Celtics series. One option that's not included is a difficulty mode, but that's not really a big deal, as if the game is a bit difficult, you could always choose a better team, and of course the opposite if you need more of a challenge. Yeah, try bringing home the World Cup to Qatar with goalie control turned on. See how well that goes for you. The graphics in FIFA are solid. I certainly wouldn't say they blow me away, but for a sports title, the engine moves extremely well, and the sample animation on the back cover is totally accurate. The game has no issues moving up and down the field quickly to match the path of the ball, and you're never left with something happening so quickly that you weren't able to see what happened. The isometric viewpoint for the field is somewhat unique. I think the only other game I can think of that previously attempted it was Super Play Action Football, but that game was less isometric and more just diagonal and overhead. I also enjoy the stadium audience, which actually has some movement to it, and it isn't just repeated static images like what appears in other sports titles. I think my one major gripe pertaining to the graphics is the absence of a running clock or score. I mean, I suppose it makes for a cleaner layout to not have those things on the screen all the time, and I suppose I can keep the score in my head, but knowing how much time is left in a half is important strategic information that you really should be able to know at all times. The sound is just as good as the graphics. Some of the crowd noise is, well, a bit noisy from an FM perspective, but I've heard much lazier white noise used in games for crowds, and this actually sounds like the din of a rowdy crowd. I also enjoy occasionally the crowd will break into soccer chants depending on what's going on during the game. It really gives FIFA that feel of watching a game on television. Beyond the crowd noise, the sound effects are solid as well, with the ball making plenty of ball-sounding thuds when it's kicked or punched, and then of course there's that unmistakable referee whistle. Even the music is pretty good, although you won't hear it very often as it only plays during the menus. All in all, FIFA International Soccer lived up to my memories of the game. It's definitely not a perfect game by any means, and it still has lots of room for improvement, as the first games in a series usually do. But it's also a very fun title, and I think I enjoyed the gameplay that went into this video more than any game I've reviewed in the last 2 months. As a result, I'm going to give this initial entrant into the FIFA series 3 stars. It's a very, very good game, and if you were to give it 4 stars, I wouldn't argue too much, but the strict focus on international play and the reliance on passwords for save games are both areas that can be improved upon.
Okay, that was FIFA International Soccer for the Genesis. For those of you out there that are watching this from another country, I hope you feel like I did the game and the sport justice. While soccer is certainly not the focus that it is around the world in the United States, I did play it for 6 years, so I think I know a few things about it at least, and I certainly know a good game when I play one, and this was that. The night I sat down to record all the game footage, I actually had to force myself to stop playing because I've been going at it for about 3 hours and it was starting to get into just one more game territory when I definitely had other things that I needed to get done. Next week on Zilog and Moto, it's a Halloween video. Sometimes throughout the year, when schedule permits, I try to match the game of the week with whatever's going on right then, and this is one of those times with a game on the Master System that I was actually going to look at a few months ago before I changed my mind. And I think that was a good choice because it's about as Halloween as it gets on the console. Is it any good though? Well, tune in next week to find out, but for those of you that are curious, I'll give you a hint. It's a port of a Sega arcade game. Sort of. Please remember to subscribe if you like this video, and remember, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.